Agenda. We're going to add an agenda item, which we will substitute for agenda item 5. We'll add city-school collaboration, and we're actually going to have to reschedule agenda item 5, the signing of the agreement with the SBEA and the school district, as the final draft hasn't been officially reviewed yet, although tentative agreements are signed. So we'll postpone that to our next meeting, David. So with that, that's the only amendment, correct?
Correct. We did not have a personnel matter on executive session.
All right. All right, so we'll shift and talk about city-school collaboration as of agenda 5.
Yeah, so the last time we reported, Elizabeth and I had met with both Kevin Dorn and Ben McKenzie. We've not had another meeting. That actually got canceled, although Kevin and I met. And so we have a fair amount of initiatives out there that are follow-ups from the last steering committee meeting. And so the idea here was to really try to collaborate around information that was going to be happening between the city and city budget timeline and information, and school budget and information and timeline as well, and to try to find a time that might be common so that we could help to, really inform the public around matters that are going to affect them. So we're in process. I did meet with Kevin and went over some of that work, used that time because Pam was not available to meet. So that's really all I have, other than the fact that, really positive energy around collaborating with us. And again, I thank Elizabeth for making some additional time available to make that happen.
Now, do we have a time set for either the next steering committee or a meeting time? I know we were talking about something in December.
Yeah, there's a December, I want to say there's a December meeting, and then there's a January meeting required by our steering committee. We're trying to think about adding another one in there, and that has yet to be set. So we have to figure that out on what date that would be.
Right, so could I ask just for, I don't know, maybe this is just for me, but for the rest of the board, if we could get those 2 dates out at a minimum, because I know those are coming right in the budget cycle too. That would be helpful.
Yeah, no problem.
Great. All right, we'll move to the update on the current status of the Howard Center's permit to open a methadone clinic, and we do have a ruling on that. Could I invite Pietro Lynn to kind of brief us on the ruling that was made recently? Yeah, sure, use that.
So, as you know, on November 12th, the court issued a ruling in the methadone clinic permit appeal. The judge decided on the basis of the plain language of the zoning ordinances in the city of South Burlington that our appeal was denied. I'm happy to share with you the specifics if there are questions, but the long and the short of it is we are now in a position where we must decide what, if anything, we will do to further pursue the appeal. That appeal can be taken to the Vermont Supreme Court. A decision and an appeal must be filed within 30 days. If we don't, then we will live with the judge's decision. If we do, then the Vermont Supreme Court will have the final say on the issue.
Okay. Could you just briefly summarize? I know there were about 3 points primarily that the ruling was made on, just for clarification for the public and people who might be viewing this.
Yes, yeah. There were 3 principal arguments that were raised. The first had to do with the change of use. We argued to the court that there was a change of use, that this was not a medical office in the conventional sense by virtue of the methadone clinic and the way it factually was different than most conventional medical offices. We made an argument that in many ways this was closer in definition to a social service use of the space. The judge looked closely at the definitions and decided that as a matter of law that this was a medical office. The second argument that we raised had to do with the location of the permitted use. That is, this location, we argued, was in the traffic overlay district. As a consequence, there needed to be a review of the traffic impacts of this permit or of this permitted use. As you know, the traffic that is going to be coming and going to the methadone clinic is going to greatly exceed the medical office that formerly was in this space. The judge, again, for some purely legal reasons, determined that he would not require that the traffic impacts be evaluated for the purposes of obtaining a permit. The final issue that we raised had to do with safety, and as you know, there was great community concern about the safety impact of having a methadone clinic in close proximity to our schools. While the judge certainly was sympathetic and raised some criticisms of the nature of the zoning ordinances and the language used and the failure to distinguish between some medical offices that ought to be close to schools and others that perhaps should not be, he in the end, because of the plain language of the ordinances in the city of South Burlington, ruled that in fact safety ought not be a consideration. And that, Elizabeth, was the basis for the decision.
Great. Thank you. Do any of the board members have questions for Pietro? Yeah, just a couple of comments just in terms of, thank you, Pietro, for the information. I wanted to just make a couple of quick comments. One, the district has spent about a little over $70,000 to not only on pursuing the legal case with environmental court, but also introducing some safety measures that would really allow us some improvement in looking out for the safety of our students and our staff. Most of those are non-recurring at this point in that they were facilities improvements, security improvements. I know thinning the trees and things like that, David, that you've covered in past meetings. There will be some recurring costs, and I would like to ask that you continue to document those so that we can share those with the public. We also are looking, I think this particular issue as it came up has highlighted an opportunity for the school to work more closely with the city in terms of developing school safety zones. So that is something that I know one of our members, Martin, is working on behalf of the board. And then I am skeptical of the treatment of the methadone clinic as being no different than any other medical clinic, and I would cite information that was published in the Free Press directly from the clinic's director of outpatient and medication-assisted treatment, who indicated that we try to be very selective. Anyone who might be prone to an angry outburst, we're not going to bring here. And also the comment that was made that there's an array of security cameras and several security guards monitoring the facility. So I think the board continues to have concerns about the safety issues of the clinic being in such close proximity to the school. But I think we would have an interest in understanding maybe what the specific steps and maybe anticipated cost would be, Pietro, of taking it to the next step from a Supreme Court standpoint. But I think tonight we really just wanted to hear the information, share it with the community, and give some thought to, what would be the next best step for the district, if that's okay. Any other comments? Great. All right, thank you. All right, we'll move on to our student representatives. I'll use the plural report.
So we mentioned last time that the Student Council is hosting a blood drive, and that's tomorrow. So any of you guys want to donate, again, I encourage you to. Or if you know anyone who wants to, you should let them know. It's from like 9:30 to 2-ish. So that'll be fun.
We we have the play that's going on. That's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at 7 p.m. And the play is called Urinetown. So you guys should all come and see it because I know we have a really talented group of SBU students. So that's really exciting.
And then we have an online newspaper this year, and it's coming out Friday. It's called The Revolution. And it's new this year, and they have it online, and they used to print it, I think, before, but now they're hoping to expand it and make it more accessible. So that should be pretty cool. I think there's kind of a large staff, so it should be pretty good. And then another thing I know that's going on that you might know as well, I'm not sure, Mr. Kushner from Big Picture is planning a trip to New York City for community members and parents and students and teachers, staff members, to, I think it's like visit schools and see like innovation and things we could bring back to South Burlington. I think in particular the high school. Yeah, so that's in February, I think 8th through the 10th. So
We actually all received invitations to that.
it's exciting.
How
Yeah,
do
I
we
got one.
access the newspaper, Selena?
I'm not sure. There will probably be a link on the homepage, I'm guessing, I would assume, but not sure. Mr. Burke might like tweet it or something.
Yeah, sure.
I would.
Okay.
I'd expect that.
Okay.
Great. Any questions? Great, thanks for the update. All right, we'll move on to the superintendent's report.
Just real quickly say, no, January 22nd and April 9th are the two scheduled steering committee meetings.
Okay,
At least unless the schedule that came out in September has changed.
okay.
Okay, it's on the back of this next, my
Oh, great.
report is the general budget schedule, so, again, the 17th and the 22nd is what you just said, right, Martin?
No, he said the 22nd.
January
22nd.
22nd
And the
and April
9th.
9th.
And April 9th, so, yeah.
So I do think we were looking to target a meeting in the December timeframe,
Yeah.
so David and I will follow up on that.
Yeah, we were trying to hit the 17th.
Okay.
Was one of the options. It was right before our 18th meeting. So that was the one, that's one date that we proposed from our notes that we shared last time. And obviously, I think you've obviously heard enough on the methadone clinic, and again, I just want to reiterate the fact that, safety measures, and I think Elizabeth has already covered that appropriately, but again, we continue to evaluate our crisis teams at all schools, not just this school or this campus, but continue to look at ways in which we're ensuring student safety. So, again, I think enough said on that.
And do you want to talk about budget?
And so the budget timeline and the budget processes, again, we just talked a little bit about those dates. On the back of that, she just identifies the dates in which we're going to be bringing to you information. I think it will be really important for me to get some direction from you around what you're thinking around budget. Again, you're going to get a chance to see some of these budget factors, which may not yet be solidified from the state, as you often know, but it would be helpful for you to be thinking about through the lens that you look through and the community input that you have to be able to give me and my staff some input around some directions that you'd like us to pursue. Again, I'll have a much more detailed information out for you with some of the things I'm thinking about, but it would be good to know a little bit of some, I'm going to use Elizabeth's word, some guardrails around some budget development.
So process-wise, are you looking to get that at the meeting on the 4th? Are you looking for something prior to that? Or even at this meeting?
I think if you have desire now, I think this would be appropriate, but again, I think, it's going to be ongoing, particularly as you get more information almost daily. You get some economic information. So again, I would like to get guidance from you. It's never too early, and I don't think it's ever too late until the budget goes to the voters. So that would be my desire. Again, this outlines both information and meetings for us. Does not mean we can't have more. And then also the current status with administrative meetings and around collecting a budget too, just so you see that.
So I do have a question for you. The most recent Vermont Digger reported on legislative pre-sessions that have been taking place. And among the things that they mentioned there is that before they've seen any of the budgetary information that I'm aware of from the districts, they're talking about a 3-cent to a 7-cent or 9-cent, whatever it was, increase in the state tax rate. Do you know anything about that? Do you know what effect that would have on us?
Well, we know that it's out there. Again, this is the preliminary work that, legislative committee is looking at. And currently it's the base education amount, which they're looking at decreasing, which obviously if it's decreased, then the per pupil allotment that comes to us would be less. And obviously that would have an impact on us, again, depending on, that variability between 3 or 7% reduction. would be significant to us. But again, we're working on that now. John and his staff are going to be providing me with kind of that first review of what we know or what we're hearing.
Get some insight into that.
Yeah. John?
Early December.
Yeah, the fourth meeting will have that in depth,
Sure.
because the state tax commissioner's letter comes out the 30th of November, hopefully a
We
day or
hope.
two earlier.
We hope.
Yes, and that'll give some detail to what we've been reading in the Vermont Digger. And so we want to have that balanced with what we've been finding from administrators, needs,
Stewardship.
buildings, that kind of thing. So it'll be not just the state, state information, state data, but also pressures on the school district. So that's kind of, that is the purpose of the fourth meeting.
Any other comments or questions as we go into this process?
There are so many, but they'll wait till the fourth.
Okay. Any other variables we're aware of at this stage of the game? I know a lot of things come at us in the 11th hour, but anything beyond what we've heard on the state ed rate?
That was a surprise that the NEEP index,
Mm-hmm.
even when in September, the Agency of Education was saying that was going to go up 2% to 2.5%, and actually the base rate went down $150 per pupil. So that's what's, I think, part of what's driving that. So
Yeah.
that's a big surprise, because that pushed pressure on us at the other end as far as being at the penalty box and just the tax rate itself.
And
And-
this year, there's not the split vote, correct?
That's right. It's
Okay.
not this year.
But there still will be a penalty
Penalty
box.
Yes, and it's that factor went from 125%. It's been for a number of years to 123 this year. So
So that coupled with the base education rate change is likely to, it's going to have an effect for sure.
when we know it, I mean, even a range of 3 to 7 cents, that's a little hard to work with because it's
What
Yeah.
what was the change, if you recall, John, on the base education rate last year? I can't recall.
it changed. Yeah, it changed right at the end.
Unusual.
Two things happened. The base amount had been held constant for a number of years, so it went up in the neighborhood of $400 to $500. So that pushed the homestead education rate up by, I think, 4 cents, but the non-residential rate went up, I think, 7
Yeah,
cents.
more substantially.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that was at the last legislative action. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a chance the base rate might go down? Is that?
Yes,
I mean-
yes. And
Right.
it's, as far as using the index now, it would go down. The base amount per pupil, not the tax rate.
And it's the 120 whatever percent over that base rate that is the
The
so-called penalty box.
right.
123.
Right.
So more to follow, and again, direction and information will be helpful. Again, I think it's, at this point, a lot of information is coming available, as I said earlier, so.
Well, to the extent we can get any information prior to the 4th to digest, I know this period of time, it's coming fast and furious, the information, but it's also fairly complicated. So I would just ask whatever we can get ahead of time to
Yeah.
really think about would be helpful.
We definitely have some known pieces. You know that we have a stewardship plan. There's some pretty significant things in there. So those aren't going to change, and so we can get those things to you. There's the variability on some of the other things that we're awaiting from the state, and we'll have more of a bearing. But again, we're going to need to make some guesstimates or ranges if it's the three, how things will affect us. So likely options.
Okay. All right. Unless there's any other questions, we'll shift into agenda item number 9, administrative reports.
So in here, it's both Common Core and the ends policy, and again, these are for discussions only, Elizabeth. And I know, again, I was at a Common Core meeting today with Stuart and Joanne Godak in Randolph, and I know that Martin actually turned in some some feedback. I appreciate that, and I do have that here, but I think what might be most helpful is just to review with you comments and questions that you might have around the Common Core, and then also ends. And again, I know other board members have also participated and provided feedback to date as well. So, that said, I'll listen.
Start with Common Core. Any comments or questions from the board?
I know not all board members, I
Yeah.
don't assume had the had some of the corrective changes from Martin. And, again, I don't want to say for Martin, again, a lot of it was, there was some just further additional.
Well, I think we had a couple versions, because we got one version and then we had, it wasn't a red line version, but it was another version with some comments in red. And then, I know, Martin, you made some comments on that
It was just
version.
edits, really.
Okay.
Proofreading edits, so I didn't really, I feel I don't have enough knowledge yet to ask good
Yeah.
questions. It's kind of what, I'm still learning. Yeah, this gets into some pretty interesting detail. I mean, it looks good to me, but I'm not an expert on how to bring kids along on reading levels, like the chart of the reading standards, for instance.
Could we maybe ask David for kind of a quick walkthrough of the sections in this? This is one of the more, I think, succinct documents on Common Core I've seen, but it has a lot of meat to it, too.
Yeah. And so I'll ask Stuart to do that for you, but.
Whoever's gonna do that, if you go through, if you would highlight places where you see big stumbling opportunities,
So,
that might be helpful.
Stuart, let me just start out for a quick second. Again, today was a day specific for administrators, superintendents and principals, curriculum coordinators, special ed directors to be there. Again, the Common Core has been unfolding, and we've done a fair amount of work in this area, but, the triangulation of all of the work necessary to implement or begin our work and to make sure that it's connected to all other components of our work is really a critical piece. And so, all the way down to communicating it effectively to our public with what we would say our elevator speech. What is it? What is it going to get us? How does it relate to either your mission statement or your ends, are really the critical components. And so when Dan says, the critical components are the stumbling blocks, I mean, the stumbling blocks for us are how to inform our public who have been under a more traditional system, curriculum, to now transitioning here, and what does that mean to me, my child, et cetera. And so what I will ask is to Stuart, just to give an overview of kind of what exists. You're going to hear things like the shifts in here, and it's like, okay, what's that mean? And, so I think it will be helpful just to give a quick overview. And then, again, it's also important for you to understand there's some level of education for you to understand, and that's our work, too. That's my work, so.
So just to be quick, if you remember last year, I gave a long presentation about the Common Core, but the main piece here is that there are two curriculums that we are in the process of final phases of implementation in terms of Common Core state standards, and they're called state standards because states had to pass them state by state. You probably have read some controversy in the newspapers about, the questions of whether they're a federal mandate or whether they're state standards, but that's the definition of why they're state standards. Each state has adopted them. Vermont adopted them, and they are in English language arts, social studies, sciences, and the technical arts. That's one of them, and the other is in mathematics. So the English language arts ones, besides having skills in reading for English language arts, it also says what are the literacy and reading skills you would need in science, in social studies, in music. So it's really important that they're not content standards in those areas. In other words, it doesn't say the science, but it says what kind of text should you read in science, moving away from textbook to real articles or to really the work of scientists, looking at primary sources in the social studies. So it's a pretty big document with a lot of implications, because it's not just our English teachers who are working on this, but it is all our content teachers at the middle and the high school, as well as the elementary teachers, of course, who teach everything, and therefore are working on reading, writing, and shift in mathematics. And the key shifts really have to do with more requirement for informational nonfiction text than we've traditionally done, a higher level of text, access to text for all kids. And the example that I give is, we do differentiate curriculum, and we would still be doing that in scaffolding to help students. But for example, in the past, if you read Great Expectations, it might be that somebody was giving an easier version of Great Expectations, I'll just say the classic comic book edition, because their reading skills in the past haven't been up to it. That's not allowed under the Common Core, because the Common Core says it's not about the plot, but it's about the whole text and what the author intended. So whether it's segments, you may not read the whole book, you really need to know what are the allusions, what are the literary things that go on in that text. And so we need to provide ways for kids to access that. And so it's really about all kids truly accessing complex text. The other piece is what's called really utilizing the text for your information. In the past, there's been a lot of, how do you feel about that? And not that we don't want kids' feelings or what they feel, and you have to bring your own knowledge, but really, what's in the text? What did Martin Luther King feel about that? Because you weren't in the Birmingham jail, and it's not just about sometime you lost a freedom. It really is about somebody losing their freedom, and what in the text of his letter from the Birmingham jail really lets you understand what that historical period, those people were going through. So it's very much based on that. In mathematics, it really is about trying to go deeper by having fewer things than in the past have been kind of spiraled around and around. You've heard of the spiral curriculum, and there is certainly still that, but it's a question of if kids are really going to understand mathematical concepts, if we go too fast through too many concepts and just go back again and again, a lot of kids have missed those opportunities. So, for example, I think I reported on in this report, really third grade is really about multiplicity, and things related to that, and to really everything that they do is based in that kind of a thought process. And so, for example, we used to start stats and probability in the third grade. That doesn't really start now until the sixth grade. Fractions much deeper in the fourth and fifth grade. So that the goal is that when kids get into sixth, seventh grade, some of the skills that they only got pieces of and then we moved on will be much more embedded in what they do. So that's part of the theory behind it, and what are called the math practices, some of which I've talked to. Both things have kind of their own ends, so to speak. What does a good language learner look like? That they're independent, that they understand diversity, that they write for a particular audience. What does a good mathematician do? They know how to model, they know how to persevere, they know how to solve problems. So those kinds of pieces are all embedded within the Common Core, and I've talked about it quickly with this report. Just the last piece that I want to talk about is the professional development aspect of this, is that, this is really where most of our energy has gone in the last couple of years, starting with the literacy with the elementary schools. We did a lot of work on reading and writing workshop as a model for moving this kind of curriculum, both through coursework and half PD work. And then for the last 2 years, those half days when teachers get out early in the elementary have been math-based. And then also we did one day last year, at the end of the year, one day was math, one day was English language arts. Because again, as I said, the fifth grade, well, the K-5 teachers, they have to teach it all. And so we've really tried to do the balance. And if you notice in the report, at some point, we're going to have to change the mathematics program that we have. We're running bridges with supplements, but it's not truly aligned with the standards of the Common Core. There are some programs out there where people begin to claim alignment, but we're not in a hurry to jump in, but we are in a hurry to try to provide for our teachers as much support as possible, because especially in the elementary level, again, they're not mathematicians by training. They will need a strong program. On the other hand, even when they have a program, it is an instructional shift, because it really talks about kids talking about their mathematics more, demonstrating their mathematics more. And that's really kind of different than some of the things we've done in the past. And at the high school and the middle school, the high school especially has really been working this year on the shifts with their Rubicon Atlas work, moving and aligning their units and standards to Common Core, and in the second part of this year to really start to align assessments to match the Common Core. So next year, the state says, and David can tell you that it's all over the place, regardless of what the state says, statewide. But the goal is that we'll be teaching to the Common Core next year to the best of our ability. Obviously, there are skill sets that kids didn't get, in third grade, who will be, in seventh grade next year, because there was no Common Core when they were in the third grade. And, they've gotten bits and pieces of it. But next year in May, we'll be assessed by the new test, which is the SBAC, Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, which will be a computer-generated test. And, from there, we'll have a better understanding. We will have model tests before then for our kids to practice with. There's supposed to be a formative assessment package that comes with that, so that we'll begin to be able to do the kind of activities and assessments that the Common Core believes that we have to do in order to reach these levels. So that's a lot of information in a very short period of time. I just want to end by saying, and last summer, the state also accepted the next generation science standards. So, just like we saw the last kneecap in this fall, the last science kneecap is slated for 2016. So somewhere around that point, there will be a science test. Whether that'll be state-generated or not, that's not clear, because it's not like there's a big consortium for science, because that's not required by Nickleby, for example. But it changes our scope and sequence quite a bit in our elementary school. It's very heavy in engineering, so that's going to be a whole another piece of work that we'll be engaged in. There's a small team from here starting in January that will be working with the state to begin to build the timelines about how to do science. And social studies just came out. Nobody's approved it yet.
So do the SBAC assessments occur at every grade level?
They will be 3rd through 8th, just like they are now, and then again in 11th grade. So it models exactly the same as what kneecap is.
Kneecap, okay. And then I'm looking at, for the math, it looks like up to a $95,000 investment for professional development. Is that
No, program.
a program? So,
That would be,
That's what replaces bridges?
right, so just to put it in perspective, so there's a Bridges 2.0, which is very different than Bridges, but made by the same company. If we were to purchase that, and I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, that would be like $900 a classroom. So anything else would be somewhere between $1,200 and $1,400 a classroom, based on prices. Now there are other ways that we could possibly go about it, that, there are some states that are beginning to do certain work and, borrowing other people's work and so on. But if we bought a program, in the conventional sense, you just have to multiply the classrooms by that kind of number.
that's what this reflects?
That's what
It's a
those
per
reflect.
program,
And
per
the same as
classroom.
replacing, we have CMP2, a lot of places are going to CMP3, which is more aligned with the Common
Is that
Core.
an annual expense for?
No,
Okay.
those would be one-time expenses, and then, especially with the middle school, the intent would be to have it electronic so that it would update.
And is the, I feel like I'm back to remedial again, which I often get to, but is there sort of a life expectancy for Common Core when you think about Bridges, and Bridges became 2.0 at some point, and I don't know how long Bridges has been in place for math, but what are the expectations for Common Core, given the drivers of being backward designed and so forth?
So, I mean, those are always, of course, hard questions. We've never had anything, like this before, but if we took the life of state standards, starting from the Vermont state standards, were basically put together around 1986, 1987, and then evolved into, the more specifics of the GLEs, but still the same standards. So if you figure that was a 15-year, period or more that we've had, the current state standards, if it's a 10 or 15-year period, I think that could be a pretty reasonable belief.
And what was helpful to me on this report was a little bit of background. I'm thinking of, if I'm asked the question, which I hope most people are smart enough not to be asking me, but kind of why Common Core. I'm looking at the background information, but I'm also looking at the paragraph that starts with being backward designed to ensure students are career and college ready. But the obvious next question that I would have, seeing this, would be, what were we doing before?
Right.
And this is probably my remedial question, Stuart, but what changed that's sort of driving the backward design portion?
Well, I think the thing to think about is that this is not about Vermont, right? It was about a national issue, and that every state designed their own standards. And if you were to look at those standard documents, they are very different, based on some of the political realities of those particular states. So I would, so for example, not that the tests are the end-all or be-all, but fourth graders, this is about 2 or 3 year old data, and I think actually John Everett might have shared this data with you. In Vermont, 64% of them made the standard in math, benchmarked internationally, 50%. 75% of the kids in Georgia made the standard in math in the 4th grade, benchmarked 30% nationally, internationally. So it's not just about Vermont standards, it's about the whole college trend of many kids arriving in college, and the colleges at least feeling not, we know there's more remediation happening in college than ever before. And the last thing I would say, but even for the state of Vermont, I think we have a very high get into college rate, but I think the whole state rate, not South Burlington's, is about a 60% staying in college rate.
Actually, there was this article, I think today, about that. So,
So
just
that's
a
part of
question
what
about,
this is
does
trying
our
to-
staff feel like this is a significant shift in services delivered? Because we do enjoy a good reputation, not only as Vermont, but as South Burlington, but our staff still thinks this is a significant shift.
This is a significant shift, and I think the places where it is really the most significant is not over the whole program, because I think we do have complex text, and I think our teachers do go very deeply into a number of places. But it really is the question, Lissa last year summed it up, looking at the final stages in all the language arts. She said, all our AP kids can do this. But this is that all kids can do this.
Gotcha.
And that's a significant shift, because it really is telling you can't sort. You need to have all kids have access to the best education.
And I think the other piece is on the lower grades, as Stuart articulated, is that, our elementary teachers are definitely needing to deepen their understanding of specific content. And in the past, we were able to hit a topic through a program, and then again, as it came back around, it would deepen their understanding, and they would get it. And this is again a shift. I hate to keep saying the word shift, but this is definitely a shift in that they have to very much go well deep into the content to provide the depth and knowledge that we feel now is developmentally appropriate. And for that, it's time, it's knowledge, and it's across all content areas. So that's definitely a component. I would say today, again, to come back on the training today, it was also, higher ed is mentioned. And there's definitely some movement around higher ed to be paying attention to what this means. Again, how are they going to be accepting and/or challenging students as they come into them from secondary education? And I think also the other part, which I think is still yet void, is our employers. You know, what are the things that they need? And again, I think we're definitely asking those questions as we travel around to our businesses. But again, we have done a good job in Vermont in comparison to several other states. So it's not like major shock, but it's still enough of a change that we're having to really, and again, we've been at it and doing good work for a period of time already. But again, we have a lot left.
Question. Stuart, you know, we've heard a lot about, you know, with the one-to-one program, how it offers differentiated learning. And then I was hearing you talk about the Great Expectations and everybody will read the exact same text. And I wondered, how does that sort of measure up if a child might have difficulty with a more complicated text? Would they not be able to have that sort of differentiated learning opportunity? How would that work?
Yeah, I mean, we would still have differentiated instruction, and we certainly would have the kind of scaffolding that students would need. And again, a junior today isn't theoretically what a junior will be 5 years from now, you know, because of what they've had in terms of the background information as we build and work on the whole piece. But at the same time, within that differentiation, because it's not just about what's the plot of Moby Dick, we would have to help students access the text if Moby Dick is what you decided to study for whatever reason, because there are standards around the language and the symbolism and the other pieces that you're not going to get from reading an easier text. So it's a question of, there are tools, like it can read it to you. You know, the SBAC is actually going to be loaded with all kinds of tools so that various students can access different parts of it. Some for all students, like changing the color of the screen, making notes in the margins, because it is a computer-generated test. Some that would be based on, still students would have accommodations, you know, based on their IEPs or other pieces. How it will all fit together as a whole piece is part of what we're working on and learning. Because, for example, last week, and this is kind of related, Joanne Godak and Jean Shute, who's the adoptive technology person, we went down to a workshop on universal design, how to design units for the majority of kids to really get it from the beginning, as opposed to trying to do piecemeal accommodations, you know, later. You know, so really looking at the whole piece. And I don't want to go too deep into that, but their symbol was the Rubik's Cube. You know, it's in color, so if you're visually impaired. So somebody first made a Braille Rubik's Cube. It was white, and it had Braille on it, but now you couldn't use it unless you were visually impaired. So somebody designed one that's got colors and it's got stars, you know, pluses, minuses, and some other symbol so that it could be used by both populations. So the idea is, how do you design it from the beginning so all could access it? So that's part of the discussion that we have as we try to rebuild our curriculum around these pieces. It's a big challenge.
So I have one question about the math piece of it. When you're talking about looking at a new math program over time that's more aligned with the Common Core, it seems like when states buy into the Common Core, which the majority isn't there a recommended math program that aligns with the Common Core that we would?
Well, so here's the piece. There will be. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, obviously all the textbook companies, as quickly as possible, before even people really understood the Common Core, you know, start shifting chapters and saying we are now Common Core aligned. So the people such as the Vermont Math Institutes, VMI, the Lairds, who have done a lot of work, they are basically saying there's no real program out there that really takes it all into account. There have been districts, Chittenden South, for example, decided to go with Bridges 2.0 because it's better aligned than Bridges now. Burlington, we were part of that, we talked about that. Burlington decided not to, you know, because it's that question of, what if Bridges 3.0 that comes out a year from now really is more truly aligned? Do we want to invest, you know, a significant amount of money? So it's not that these programs don't exist or they're not evolving. It's that when we finally make the decision, whatever program it is to buy, we want to make sure it's the best investment. So to hurry into it versus, giving tools to.
And I think the other part is, programs. We're looking at what's the best resource to assist us in delivering what we need to deliver. And it's not always, again, and synonymous with textbook is, resources available through technology and online versions and things of that nature, which we know are really, really critically important, and we're looking into those. So right now, we're kind of in these supplemental patches, if you will, to say, we know it's coming, there are some things, fairly low cost, what can we do now that's not major committal, to look at all of what might be coming available, both in the electronic world and other, to make that bridge. And again, I worry about just a quick step off. Again, obviously, as Stuart said, there's companies that are quick to respond to say it meets all of that, and we want to have a real critical eye on that.
We have, though, in the last couple of years, the kindergarten and then the first grade, and this year now all the K-5 math standards on our report card have shifted to change so they match the Common Core, so that as teachers will be marking students in K-5, they can see what it is that's the main things they need to focus on, and we've changed. And so we're trying to give the resources, right, for that to happen for teachers. But it's a make do. And again, it depends on how the mathematical knowledge of our K-5 teachers. We have some that are very highly trained in mathematics. I would tell you they're all literacy trained. Mathematics, some of them, is not, and that's the other piece we're doing, is we have to raise everybody's level and science soon.
So when you go, just out of curiosity, when you go through a shift like this,
Yeah.
is there an expectation that as the SBAC results come in, that becomes sort of your baseline off of which to improve? Or is it you start with a target, you assess where you are, and then you really have to deploy incremental resources to accelerate the closing that gap?
I think it's a bit of both, Elizabeth, because nobody's ever taken a test like the SBAC. And I could give you a whole big, I just got a new slideshow on it. If you want to have a presentation on that, I'm happy to do that at some point. But, this is going to be an assessment in which theoretically, based on how you answer, there's thousands of ways you can go. Supposed to be able to assess you quicker, because if you get, one right, you're going to go up here. If you get that right, you're going to go, up till 2 grade levels above where you are, possibly down to 2 grade levels below where you are. The test will send you so that they can really find out your skills instead of having you just get them all wrong or quit. And so that's a whole different concept, in terms of that's the smarter and smarter balance. Obviously, quicker results because, they are computer tests. But at the same time, we are beginning to create our own, activities and assessments, in order to have a sense of how we, will do. The last piece on that is there are some states who have jumped the gun. In other words, they've created some of their own Common Core aligned testing. In Indiana and New York, you might have read about New York recently, so they're in a different consortium park, not SBAC, but they decided not to wait, a year. They've been putting a lot of material out, and, their scores were, compared to their old New York scores, which, I don't think New York had an easy test. The regions were certainly part of it, and so on. Their scores went way down because the expectation has gone way up.
Thanks. Any other questions? All right. Want to shift to ends policy? Want to introduce that?
Sure. So in your packet is also our revision on our ends. And again, board members have had the chance to do some previewing of that as well. One of the things I think is important is you have ends in action, which again, we've included in this packet. Again, we're looking at specifically ends, though. So again, two things, ends and actions, kind of what's been happening, how are we assessing them, what are those components? And again, our continued effort to nail down, and again, as you've even heard, that we're going to have additional assessments that we're going to have to figure out how that then factors into our students meeting our ends. How are we going to use those components of SBAC, et cetera, to identify what that might be. So again, that's in your packet, and then we get into the ends statement, which again is the rewrite. So I don't know what your pleasure would be. Again, the ends in action was kind of an overview that led into then the ends. So again, maybe before we just jump in and give you the overview, answer any questions that folks might have around what you have in front of you. Helpful, not helpful, major questions.
Questions from the board?
I mean, the board charges me, which, again, and you've heard this from the past, again, and my work with all the administrators and specifically Stuart is to come up with, how can I demonstrate to you that our ends are, being responded to and being met. And so our efforts at this point, and you've heard before, is, the dashboard approach around how, a student's, as we determine whether a student is meeting our ends and how we are evaluating that. And so we're calling that our ends in action. And again, you may want to say you should have started with the ends and looking at that, but again, ends in action, really articulating that. So there are some things here that I think are important. I mean, part of this is that and you've heard me say this, we have a fair amount of data collected through our report cards and through various assessments. We have a lot of information available on our student information system, and so some of the things here, for instance, in two students are highlighted here around their articulation of a standard, and so when proficient they get entered in that way, and we're able to then sort that way for all students in that particular grade. So again, a resource to us to really understand what are the available components of information as we look to achieve those components of our ends. So again, that's just a little information around the ends in action. And then a rubric here again, and this is a lot of the work that Stuart and staff have been working on, looking at kind of the rubric, if you will, from the novice to the exemplary. And so just, again, I won't read all of those, but again, this is a way in which we then would have teachers assess where students are, where their class is, and how we best respond to making sure that they're meeting those components. So that's the ends in action. I don't know, just pause there for a second if there's any questions.
I just wondered, David, if you could explain a sentence to me. Page 2, it says, since graduation is presently based on Carnegie units and not proficiency, a student may never be recorded, even if they make the standard. What does that mean? I don't understand what that means.
So these aren't graduation requirements for a student? To make the SB6, for example? So there are, the 9th and 10th grade have activities, assignments that assess the SB6. It could be that somewhere along the line, a kid who didn't get entered because they didn't make it as a 9th or 10th grader actually did make it as a junior, but the teachers of those classes aren't recording it. It's not a specific assignment at this time. And so when somebody goes to graduate, they're graduating because they took 4 units of English, not because they made the SLR, of whatever. So this is not looked at as part of a graduation requirement. If we had proficiency-based graduation, which we will have at some point, the state, is saying so as well as us, then the proficiencies are going to be not your Carnegie units, but you'd have to be able to say they can do this, this, and this in English in order to graduate, whether it'll be the ends, all of them, some key power ends, key standards. I mean, all those things, have to be discussed, but at some point, it's because you can know and understand and do something that you theoretically will graduate from high schools in Vermont, not because you took 4 years of English, 3 years of science, 2 years of a world language, which is a Carnegie unit, which you get D-minuses the whole time, and you're a graduate of high
What's the
school.
time shift away from the Carnegie units to?
My
proficiency?
understanding is that the document coming out from the state, the current 7th graders will be the first required proficiency-based graduation class. Our 2020 plan actually has it 1 year ahead of that, but I'm not sure we'll make that.
So 4 to 5 years. we're
That's
talking
right.
about. Okay. Yeah, I looked at, maybe I'm paraphrasing this wrong, but I looked at the ends and actions as sort of these are things we're doing, not necessarily routinely monitoring or making a requirement as a proficiency. So it's a little bit of the baseline of, these are in place and we may want to link them more formally to ends. Is that fair?
Yeah, yes, I think that's part of the piece on the question of the ends,
Yeah.
Draft revision, to really be clear on what the language is so that we do have the matches so we can begin to really assess, what the board believes the student should be assessed for. And then I think will become the other questions of what parts of those become required in order for I'm not saying this facetiously, but I'm not sure we'd be able to say, well, you're no longer curious, you can't graduate.
Well, that's the first time I've heard power ends, because that's,
Well, I don't know, but to me, if you look at, like, for example, the academic ends,
Yeah.
We could very well say if you can't write in a clear and concise and organized manner, you may not be able to graduate,
That may be the one, that may be a.
for example, and
And I
that's,
think you're right, when you look at, these are opportunities, so these are happening along the way. We're absolutely gonna have to be very specific to the student where those are demonstrated, right? Those
Yeah.
components have to be demonstrated and recorded, so that we can demonstrate, or I can demonstrate to you that our students are meeting the ends.
and was the dashboard, when you were talking about a dashboard, are you thinking about that in terms of sort of the prioritized ends, or
I
no
think,
opinion?
well, I think to start with, we would probably look at which ones we wanted to focus
Ensure.
on first, just to get it up and running. Because everything that's in that dashboard, somebody's recording, right? So, we have to build in the capacity to have good rubrics, have good assessments, and, so that we know what's being recorded is accurate. So I think by, once we have, revised ends to really, choose the ones we would like to build a dashboard around, and then expand from there. That's my thought.
I have a desire for the dashboard to be the most effective tool for those that are going to have the opportunity to look at. For you, it's kind of how many of our kids are actually meeting, the components. For our teacher, if I'm a 4th grade teacher, I'd like it to be available to say how many of my students in relation to the ends in an academic area are proficient or have areas. So I can cater my instruction to then make sure that they are, from wherever they are, to grow to be successful in all areas of our ends. Again, on our report card, it's able to articulate it, associated as well. So, and for me, that I'd like it to be, a functional. It needs to be a functional and useful tool. And again, it may, under academic, it may be highlighted only a couple of those key components, but it's all wrapped in together under the academic component.
Thanks,
So.
Rich. Okay. Other questions on ends? Comments?
On the ends policy revised, or the action, or what?
Any of the packet?
Well, I guess I'm just trying to think of a way to get to the point where our ends are useful, which they haven't been yet. Because, the whole idea is that we're looking at them for seeing how the schools are performing. I think the schools are performing great, but this is something, you know, we're looking at multiple different factors to determine that. Graduation rates, which are important and such, but that's the purpose, was the end, so we could tie budget, we could tie performance evaluations, all this stuff. It's just not getting there. And I'm just trying to think through how to use this exercise of revising these to get to that point. And I guess I have a couple ideas I'll just throw out there, looking at the ends policy revised. I think one thing that might be helpful in looking through this is to get a little idea of how we intend, and we've been through this somewhat, how we intend to monitor each of these. And maybe this will cause us to perhaps adjust an end. I mean, maybe, you know, we've talked before about the fact, well, this is what we want, and we'll deal with whether we can monitor it and how we can monitor it later. Maybe we should have that as part of this discussion. So perhaps at least if we have an end in here, we have some idea whether we're ever going to be able to monitor it. I don't know if that necessarily means we get rid of it, but it might help our thinking on what to focus on. The second is I really think, and I don't know, that the process has to include people are closer to the ground. I don't know if we have to have it go to all the teachers, probably not, but at least the building administrators. It seems that we need to have them fully engaged in this, because I don't think our forcing it from above worked last time. So I would very much want to make sure that it's kind of coming up from below as well. And I know that that's part of what we're trying to do by incorporating the SB6 in here and such, but I think it's very important for us to make sure that we have that. So those are my kind of big comments, trying to figure out, more specifically, I'm not sure that I agree with the academic proficiency, change of not requiring a certain level of knowledge on the actual material, as opposed to the building strong content. And I suppose building strong content knowledge might cover that, if that's what the intent was. Because if we have a curriculum
we didn't take out the curriculum, Martin, we just
No,
put it
I
up
say
there.
that, well, if they're put up there, it's participate in full and enriching academic experiences that include these various topics. It doesn't say anything about whether they have to learn anything about those topics, I suppose, unless you look at the building strong content knowledge for those, and I suppose that's tied well enough. But that's getting a little bit too detailed. I don't want to, get into the weeds at this stage. I'm just trying to think of.
I think Mark's right on with those comments. I think that I would state it a little shorter, saying that I'd like to see ownership throughout the organization and monitoring, an idea how that's going to happen. I think those are two elements that are going to be required for success here in the end.
So I think, I totally agree with you, and I think what's missing here is, and I think, for me, it's important for you, because you aren't in it every day. But one of the things that is important to me is that when we began this, one of the things that I said is that we needed to communicate it more broadly. And so, there's definitely, and I'm not going to be able to articulate the chronology, and I'm not saying that it's complete, but one of the things that we did is we said this has to be communicated more broadly, and it was done at the very beginning of a year, and it was rolled out to also get feedback and collect evidence where we could find the evidence that was happening in the everyday classroom, whether it would be in the academic or morning meeting. And so we've been able to collect that data, and as a result, there's been definitely some buy-in and some sharing from our staff. And then further, the administrators, again, have been brought up to speed, obviously by the first that I had just explained, because they need to be the deliverers of that. But then more recent, it's been about, we need to make sure that there's some commonality and not all kinds of different expectations combined. And again, SB 5 and 6 have been good, but that has been our most recent chronology of work to say, hey, administrators, we are one, and we need to be clear and concise about what we want for all students. And again, these are the board ends, and again, that's kind of the reflection here. My takeaway from here is that I need to tell you a little bit more, not just you, but the story about how these were developed and what we've done to date. Because even you, the board, I don't think you have any idea of the number of times of the activity that we're doing. That said, I think Martin's right. What assessments are attached to those would be helpful information to you as well. That's my work, essentially, but I think it's fine to provide that to you. I need to be able to tell you how I am going to be measuring each and every component of those ends. And we have a fair amount of that filled out. Again, the complexity is, as you just heard from our previous discussion, Common Core is around the corner and going to infuse some yet different assessment measures, different expectations, and how does that then meld in? So, listen, I have a lot of work to do. I'm often frustrated around, changed initiatives that are happening statewide or federally. Our ends, I think, are good, and I think we're in a good place. We have a lot more still to happen around making sure teachers, are part of this ongoing discussion.
Yeah, I
So-
guess, part of the problem is that they are considered the board ends and not the district's ends. That's always kind of been my impression. And that's where the buy-in comes in. And maybe this is in the ownership, but maybe this is also a bad time because there's so much else seeming to go on. There wasn't as much 4 years ago when we started this process. But I'm not sure that we can just sit around and wait for all those things to fall in place.
I don't want to mean it in that way. I think we're in a good place.
No,
And I
wasn't
think there is
suggesting that.
ownership right now. And I think it actually really, really fits well for us around navigating through even other initiatives like Common Core. Our ends are clear. It might be that the Common Core and SBAC actually, as they come along, our ends are our highest priority of success determinant for our students moving on. We have all kinds of other measures in here that we're going to have to be paying attention to. You expect that of me. But again, I think the ends are a really helpful way to articulate, what we want. Where individuals have mission statements, doesn't provide enough clarity. And so I feel that you are in a good place, and I think it is right that the board has an ends, but I do feel they're currently adopted.
I'd like to suggest that we resolve to delete the word board in front of ends.
The what?
Okay. Delete the word
Oh.
boards in front of it.
They said board. You were
If you want to
bored.
substitute something in front of it, put district, okay?
Yeah.
But it needs to be more pervasive than the boards, and as long as we're viewed as being a separate pontificating body on the thing, it's not gonna get us to where we want to get to, in my opinion.
I don't think the board ever referred to it as the board's end.
Yeah, I don't.
It's always been
I've been the
end
end
stuff.
statement, really, but.
But it seems to.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm not sure what the next steps are, except, I'll throw it up as a possibility. I mean, we have laid out this ends, we've laid out what we think are some changes. And should the administration, with definitely looking to the building administrators, take this and work with it and come back to us with this is what will work as far as being able to monitor and getting at everything that you want here. But we want to put it in somewhat different terms, or we want to get that ownership and then bring it back and, maybe it's, not really a negotiation, but maybe it's kind of a little bit of a back and forth that we think there's a real important thing that you're no longer really pushing for.
Well, I think
I don't know if that
I think
makes.
we got that assurance last time that the
Right.
work that was done here incorporated administrative feedback, and this was a version that there was consensus on.
Right.
What I found, I actually found this work helpful once I went through it. I felt like it was fairly well aligned, and the way that it was laid out, gave me some assurance that we weren't having to go back and sort of say, was this captured or not?
Right.
The fact that there are 3 documents attached to an ends discussion is where I would sort of have an issue, that it's ends in action, it's student learning experience, and then it's revised ends. So I think a takeaway from my perspective would be if we can end up with this document with the best available metrics, and all the ends and actions aren't necessarily gonna fit here, because I don't think I don't think there should be any effort to plug activities that are going on that aren't the best metrics associated with the ends. And I also have an expectation we will have ends that have gaps from a metric standpoint.
At least
And we'll have to
initially.
figure that out,
Initially.
right.
But
Maybe
I
also
think a good outcome
some of
would be one document with the metrics that I hope reflects kind of the consensus. The one thing I always keep in mind is that the original ends did incorporate community feedback. So I think one of the things the board will need to think about is if there's going to be a revised version, sort of how we engage the community in that, and maybe marry that up with a discussion of, what the proposed metrics are to measure those ends. And like you said, David, I think Common Core, elements of it seem like they would fit really
You bet.
nicely
Right.
and easily into metrics here,
So-
based on the way you've described it, Stuart.
So just a quick question, I mean, so when you say administration, I wanna make sure I understand, like, the building administrators are fine with this, they're behind this revision, and, cause they're the next level down to convince the teachers, is that,
So that's what I want to
Oh,
talk about.
okay.
Mark. So that the document that was given to the board a few weeks ago was the one the administrators had approved and rewritten. And since then,
We tweaked it.
right, so I remet and David remet with Diane and Julie about what people felt the comments. Those have not gone back
Okay.
Okay.
to the administration. Now, at least not formally, not like we did before where we really went through it. Because I just want to make sure we're going in the right direction, and that I was taking the information that Julie and Diane gave me and also going in the right direction, because this is, not the same document. So if, I was, so for example, and Julie and Diane can tell you, the academic proficiencies, I find the old ends really inadequate, because it just says you're gonna take some courses.
Yeah.
So whether we need to build a little more language to say what we mean by building strong content knowledge, strong content knowledge is for the courses listed above, or whatever it is, but I think that we really need to look at academic proficiency, not academic taking stuff.
Yeah.
That being said, there are some places there are still redundancies as you
Right.
read through, is something, maybe it is, because maybe it is a lifelong skill, and maybe it also is a citizenship skill. Maybe they should both be there, but maybe they should, there's some tightening up that needs to be done as we continue to work,
So,
So,
to your point, good question. It has been vetted. It's right for us to take, not too long, but certainly given board feedback now, again, that's why it's back in front of you again. And again, the administrators likely will say, with the changes that it made, we have a concern here, or we don't see how this can be done. But likely, I think, we're on the right track. And as a result of this dialogue, and I agree, we got to be sensitive to community here. Obviously, we're presenting to community, but we have some work to do, I think, in that area. But I would like to suggest that, again, given the feedback that you have in front of you, any changes that are reflected goes back to the board, and that we work on getting some community discussion around these ends.
And I don't recall any, Julie and Diane, correct me, but I didn't recall any material changes in your comments to the administrator's revised ends, other than cost to the community, which was something I think we did feel strongly about including. But was there anything else that was really material?
Well, we tweaked a few things. I'd be interested to know what the administrators think, since we made those revisions, because, they're living and breathing the ends, and I'd like to know, what people who will be dealing with them day to day think about those changes. So I wonder about that as a next step before we go any further. And
I don't think we should go to the community until it goes back to the
No,
administrator.
I agree. I didn't realize that it
Had gone back, I'm sorry.
hadn't gone back, but that's, I mean, I think that's an obvious next step.
Still your
Gotcha.
role
In our court.
document. I do want to point out one last thing, in terms of, one of the rubrics. I do want to point out this says district ends, it doesn't say board ends. For the ones that we have, started to create rubrics on social responsibility, collaboration, initiative, and self-direction, and things like that. So I just wanted to make that clear, that we don't see them as the board ends.
I'm happy, again, if there are specific things that board members see that you'd like to, you have questions on, we would bring this back to the administrators and bring it back to the board again for feedback from the administration on the yet, kind of revised.
And
Ends.
Dan also had given me, they're not incorporated, but Dan had given me a number of, suggestions or thoughts about this particular document.
So can we, after you do that, can we bring it back for a first reading so we can move this along?
Sure, I agree.
I think it would be great, and I think then it could be vetted through community,
I mean, that should be the vetting process, is just having it through the normal channel of.
Well, and I'm also thinking we have an opportunity, I'm thinking about the budgeting process, but the budget book may be an opportunity to actually start to include a reference to the ends as, I mean, it's a concise document, and
What we're trying to
to the
work on,
extent
what the
that we have
budget's-
some monitoring agreed to.
So I have one last question, because I can do one of two things. I can, after the administrators work with these and revise them, I can give you a document like this where you can see the old ones and the new ones, or we could write a new, clean copy. So I'm kind of curious which you would prefer. In other words, if you want to move towards a reading, it may be that you want a new, clean copy.
We need to see
Yeah.
the red line.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
But we
fine.
should have the clean copy for a first
I
reading.
think we
definitely.
can have that exact, and then the
Yep.
reflected top. We can
That's
work on
all I
this.
need to know.
Well, thank you for the feedback.
Good, good discussion. All right, we'll shift to agenda item number 10. This is an action item, third reading of the policy on prevention of bullying of students.
Can I move to approve the policy for prevention of bullying of students?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
It's
thank you.
approved. All right, we'll shift to executive limitations policy 2.0, global executive restraint, and this is an action item as well.
So, again, I don't need to talk a lot about it, Elizabeth, but again, the board's seen this. This has been updated with the appropriate attachments and information. Again, pretty straightforward on constraint upon me, what I can and cannot do. And so, again, I think fairly large packet of information, but happy to
I
answer
had
any
a
questions.
question, I don't think it made it to the, I don't know if it was on, I didn't see questions, but it was on, as a result of the Winooski incident, and I don't know if it falls under this policy or not, but the, when school is in session, we certainly have a strong crisis plan, but our facilities are used routinely during non-school hours, and I wondered if this policy addressed that issue.
I believe it does. I guess the only way I would say to you is that, in my evidence in attachment 3, crisis response meetings, I do have, and we have had as a district, sessions with city, recreation, and those that are in the hours after school, typically. I will tell you, though, that there's always ongoing opportunities for improvement, and myself and John actually met with some of an evening custodial person, and we recognized that, there's some need for some added training, and so we're gonna be doing some additional pieces there, which I would then include in evidence, but little things around what's on the cart, calling, paging, all of those things we tell them once, but we need to be practicing more regularly. So we do have that. It is a very difficult time, I think, when the schools are open and there's a lot of activity going on. What do you do when? Similar to the Winooski situation
I
you
think
brought up.
I guess it's a question as much as anything, but we really could not execute the current safety drills outside of school hours. Is that correct?
No, we could execute.
We could.
Yeah,
Would we always have the right staff?
well, that's part of the challenge. Our evening custodians are sometimes those that would be the leader, the command leader at that moment, and the tools that they have at their disposal, from our Present 3 system to, utilization of the intercom system to, the recreation, again, it's known, and we ask them to make sure there are people who are renting the building or playing, that they understand our crisis command so that they can do the things that are necessary. So that definitely, we've thought of that. There's always ongoing work to make sure that is being practiced. And that's a lot of what we've been trying to do with our tabletop exercises, and to sit down and then to execute. And, the police department, I got an email from the police, working on active shooter, probably in response to Winooski. But they want to, use our facilities a little bit for some training and then do an actual exercise. So they're thinking as well. And they've been at the table with us, which has been really, really important to our work. John actually went off to a training today. I obviously was supposed to go. He went on my behalf with a couple others, and I was down in Randolph. But that was on, safety assessment. And again, I think I'll let you talk a little bit about that, John, if you.
Well, it was the governor sponsored it, and there were 300 or 400 people there. It was very well attended. Both police officers and people from the academic side and facilities. Some of the student threat assessments that we do, I think we're way ahead of the rest of the state. Work that Pat Messerly and Wynn had done last year, which was good, because I look at the facilities a lot of times and don't get to see all that. So it really, and then there's new technology. Our camera system was put in 7 years ago, and it was with a grant, and our entrances, for instance, there's no cameras on the second floor of the high school or this school. And there are new technologies that are wireless and all kind of things to think about as far as where we go from here. And then locally, I wanted, Mike O'Day spent quite a bit of time last week putting together all the information for his coaches. And it was pretty concise. Here's this incident, what do you do, and
Contact numbers.
right.
Yeah.
Similarly, when situations such as the one that occurred a week or so ago up in Winooski occur, do you get briefed on what happened and what the conclusions were, and so that you can bounce that against your procedures to see if there's something to be learned from it?
The South Burlington Police Department is our resource, and so, as you know, we're fortunate to have school resource officers.
Yeah.
And a great relationship with Trevor Whipple, so we often, so many departments were there responding. And, personally, I had opportunity to just kind of understand what went on, what they did, what could have been done differently.
It just seemed to me that having at least a countywide thing where you share those things after the fact, when the
Kind of the after action.
when the lessons learned, what we've done better, what's the best practice, that sort of thing. It sounds like it'd be a good thing to just have available to whoever's orchestrating the crisis efforts.
We had a lockdown, it's been 3 winters ago now, where a custodian was threatened by a former employee, and one of our administrators in the high school overheard what was going on and put the school into lockdown. I just happened to be here, probably working on a budget or something, and so we were here for 3 hours, and the public library was open, and took a while to get the door closed. There's certain things, but we had a huge meeting after that with the police and the fire and administrators, and it was very productive. I think you learn from something like that.
To your point, Dan, there's always more we can do. I mean,
Yeah,
on
I'm
the
just
sharing
looking that
and
there's a,
resourcing,
You don't have to go looking for it, but the people that know, that have been involved know how to get it. If it's the police, then they're gonna bring it in. I'm really okay with that. I'd just like to see a mechanism that,
Yeah, I think we have a really
Allows you to learn.
effective mechanism right now. We're really, really fortunate as a city to have PD and fire at our meetings.
as long as you never become complacent about it.
Absolutely, and again, tomorrow is a busy day, you can look at the schedule, this is actively ongoing and, has a lot of my staff deployed to do these trainings, and again, I think board members, if you're ever around, you wanna come to one of them, sit in on one of the crisis meetings, you could. So again, they happen at every building and
I will say,
locations.
we are in the school a lot. I've never
I know
had
you
training.
will. That's right. So shame on me but usually you're surrounded by an administrator.
Somebody who knows
sometime.
something.
Yeah. Well, maybe.
Can I ask one question about the evidence, David?
Uh-huh.
So if you refer to managing cell phones and social media during a crisis situation, and I'm just wondering, is there a way, a mechanism by which you can make parents aware of that policy and what that is? Because, and students too, I just wonder, or maybe they already know, but
Yeah, I
I
think,
guess what I'm thinking about is, you know how sometimes we find out from our kids before anything happens or an alert goes out because they all have these devices in their hands and.
it's really, really hard. I mean, I'm not gonna give you a line here. It's really, really hard to manage social media where, particularly we have young students that are, have devices often in their hand, and how we manage that. I mean, I think it is a point of, it's a point of control for us to try to really make sure we're, number one, being safe, communicating effectively to those that need to know, our parents, our community, our teachers and staff. And beyond that, it starts to begin to get broken down with how you're gonna control the student who's, down and doing that. In some ways, again, in fairness to Patrick, where most of this is a lot in his court, just by virtue of the technology and the age, it's actually to try to help manage that in an effective way. And so that's a lot about what he's trying to do, to help with, put out the appropriate message, make sure that students that are coming back into the schools get word that they shouldn't come back into school. Again, we have some systems in place to try to make sure that people don't do that. So again, it's effectively managing it. I think we're always going to be around, a learning curve around that and how to manage it. So right now we struggle with, we don't want to take everybody's phone away because that's, that's their right. We want to try to control the message, which is kind of what we hear from our media folks, and how can we best use them, and that's really kind of where we're at. Important to the students to know that, by putting out things that are inaccurate or inflammatory doesn't do anybody any good, particularly if you don't have all the information. So I don't think that's really a great answer for you, Julie, other than it's complex and hard, and we're trying on it.
Good. Thanks.
All right, so a review, reasonable interpretation? Yes. Adequate data? And in compliance? All right. Great. We'll move on to agenda item number 12, setting the agenda for the December 4th meeting.
So a couple of things we need to add back on, make sure we get the city's school collaboration. And we need to add back in the SBA contract assignment agreement. Oh.
Because I thought we decided on 2.10 curriculum that we were gonna wait until we had the ends more, because that was the issue with the report,
Yeah,
was
that's
about
right.
the alignment of the ends, and that we were gonna wait until we had that question resolved.
So Stuart, I don't think,
Do you think it'll be possible to have
the ends
an
revised.
update on?
I don't know, I don't want the administrative meeting schedule, it may be
We don't
like
meet-
the day before this
Okay.
meeting, so I don't know that we'll have it for the 4th.
Looking at your watch, it's not like hours, it's.
No, well, it's done.
I think that makes good sense. We gotta figure out, maybe we
We'll
need to
figure out
figure
a
out how
way.
to get the
Maybe
fourth.
we will, maybe we
Okay.
things are gonna start moving fast. Okay,
I guess, I just have a thought on number 5. I think as a board, we'll need to make some decisions about whether or not to move forward in any way, and when will we have that conversation, because we may be asked that question. Just about whether, because there's a 30-day timeline.
Say again, Diane.
The number 5 on the agenda,
Yeah.
where we're setting the agenda, Pietro explained the findings, and there's a 30-day timeline, and the public may be wanting to know, whether we are moving forward or whether we're not, and when will we have that conversation, and that's 2 weeks away, so I think.
We'll have the information we've requested from Pietro on the next stage by then, and really that decision probably should be made at this meeting.
So it should be an action.
So we should
Right.
make that an action. That's a good
Right,
thought.
so I'm just thinking, call it something a little different.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay.
we can
Yeah.
reword that a little bit, because it's definitely changed from the permit to then
Yeah.
the response, so we can make that change. And I think it's right and that's an open session item to have a conversation around, what you wanna
Should
do.
make that clear, because there may be people who want to come.
Yep.
and try to
Make
convince
that
us one way or
change.
another.
And I noticed we dropped dropped at least the TEL survey off the future agenda items. I don't know if that's the only thing. 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, that just fell off the bottom.
Mhm.
So we can just put that back on.
Mhm.
I
I did
did,
not purposely take that off.
I did get my monthly meeting with Rich Weiss and Kathy Bewley was postponed due to a conflict this week, but I did get some preliminary information from the TEL survey, which actually we could probably distribute, but we just need to decide whether we want to schedule a date and how much time, and then maybe craft the kind of feedback we're looking for. It may not necessarily be building specific, but it might be really district, and keep it to a reasonable amount of time as well. So I didn't have a chance to follow up with the two of them, but we can talk about whether that information should go out right now or not.
Is there anything from the future agenda items, other than that, that maybe we could have a report in the superintendent's report, or just kind of fit in somehow, just to kind of.
Some of them are, again, just reminders, crisis planning. I think you probably have a fair amount of that.
What's the status with tuition students, David? I continue to get people asking me about this, and I
Yeah.
know Patrick's getting it as well.
Yeah. Again, these are maybe priorities that you want to have in the legislative process. Again, the current law is the way it is. So there's been no change. We have had it on here as I would say, a placeholder and a desire for a continued conversation around this. So it's really whatever your pleasure wishes to be. I'm in the process of trying to come up with, I'm not trying to say coming up with specific things that I think will be important for the board and myself to be watchful of at the legislative level. So this being one of them. It may not be yours, sounds like it would be yours, Julie, but it may not be yours when we look at all of them. Again, this is an important issue to us, particularly, around the right opportunities for students and costs.
Well, one of the things that David and I talked about with the city too is getting, prior to, what normally has been a city school presentation of budgets before town meeting, is doing that earlier on in the process and inviting all of our legislators. So as we develop our budget, it may prove that this is a significant impact from a revenue standpoint. So that meeting may be one that would be an opportunity to highlight to our legislators. I think we should think about that.
When do they need to make a decision if there aren't any changes in terms of whether we need to have a cap or what that cap would look like? When does that decision have to be made?
As far as tuition students accepting, or
Right.
you mean?
Like we had a cap this year, and
Those same things will be in play. Again, from just the pure financial perspective, it's the revenue loss. And so we can give you that, assuming that our request would completely fill up our allotted space. So, John?
The cap policy is due on or near February 1st.
And then, again, doesn't mean we have to wait, obviously with the building of the budget. We in the past, I don't know when we did it last year, we did it before that.
Okay.
So your question around taking things off, or moving them to other reports, again, you can kind of direct me. Is there one that you'd like maybe here to just have in a superintendent's report?
Or that, or, Elizabeth, you brought up the survey. I mean, is that something that we could move to an agenda? I don't know how
That's
much
partly
time.
in conversation,
Yeah, I
with-
think it can't be for this next agenda,
Okay.
but maybe sometime after that.
I don't know, I just like to, when we add, and I guess we didn't really add anything new tonight, but just try to attend to the list.
You're good about keeping us honest. Have we had any luck scheduling the guard over at Chamberlain?
having the guard,
Or just having the meeting with the Guard, National Guard?
I've had the meeting with the National Guard.
Oh, did that happen at school?
It did not, it happened on their location, so
Okay.
I guess if I did not report out on that?
You did not.
I thought I'd give you a little update on that.
So maybe we'll put that on the next agenda? Or
Put it on
unless you
my
wanna-
report.
well. Okay. And will we have some feedback on the RFP by the next meeting?
I'll have to look at the date due on those,
Okay.
but, I mean, I can give you an update for sure on
Maybe,
what's
yeah,
come in.
just put it
yeah,
as an
yep.
update, okay,
Mhm.
great. All right. Okay, we'll shift to, we covered future agenda items, shift to consider minutes. And I think we have 4 meetings. Any changes to the November 1st meeting? Okay, by consensus, those are approved. Any changes to the November 5th meeting? By consensus, those are approved. Any changes to the November 6th minutes? Again, by consensus approved. And any changes to the November 7th meeting? By consensus, those are approved. All right.
Thank you.
Any comments on the consent agenda?
I would like to, again, one of your consent agenda items is to hire some additional time for our English language learning teacher. Again, we're definitely, this is going to be an area that we're going to really need to be paying attention to in this budget. We've definitely had an increase in numbers that are in need of this service, and so this is obviously an add to staff. And then on the other side, I want to, I want to recognize a retirement by Mike O'Day, our Director of Student Activities. He's been with us a long time. He's been in this district. He's provided many, many years of service, well into the 30 range. And he's a student of South Burlington and a graduate of South Burlington High School, and has provided, a wealth of service, a wealth of knowledge, and had many of our students travel through, programs of co-curricular, both athletic and academic, and has done, an outstanding job in providing those services. So again, I just wanted to recognize to the board of his retirement, and again, just make that known.
Yeah. And I think on behalf of the board, David, if you could pass on acknowledgement of his service over the years. And I know we've had a chance to hear a lot of reports about the students' lives that he's affected, and thank him very much for the service to this district.
I'll put a letter together and sign it, for the board, and make sure that gets to him.
Great, thank you. Good. Any comments on accounts payable, orders 18 and 19? We had a board self-evaluation. Do we have that?
Should
Yes, we do.
at your place, I think.
Why don't we take a few minutes with that? And do you want to cover announcements while we do that?
So you do have announcements at your place, but while you're filling those things out, I'll let you know. Always good to have our Scholastic Book Fair, and for those of you who've been around, those are open to you as well. So November is our month for that at the Chamberlain School, 23rd, 25th, and 26th. Orchard, we'll have them the 19th through the 26th. And remember that next week for us, the 25th and 26th, there's no school student, parent, and teacher conferences. And the 27th, 28th, again, and 29th is Thanksgiving break. And you already heard from Sabina and others about the performance that's upcoming and tickets. And if any of you are interested, you can let me or Delina know, probably better Delina to know, and we'll get you tickets if you wish ahead of time.
I already bought my tickets.
Nice.
With my cold hard cash for Friday night.
Right. And then finally, just this is kind of the connection to a lot of the activity with the city and just a variety of reports and meetings that have been happening. And the task force meeting I did go to, and we do have Holly Ruel, who's been a member on that and sitting on that task force. Specifically, the task force group has been looking at property for the public library, city office, and recreation office. And they have hired the consultants of Dorr and Whittier, and they've had 2 meetings. They'll have a third coming up. And I did go to the last meeting and I did indicate to Elizabeth that just on the board's behalf, the school district's behalf, supportive of the thinking, but also the recommendation of working collaboratively together on looking at facilities within the city and facility master planning, and really wanting to ensure that we're doing this together. So master planning and capital improvement plan discussions were there. But again, they're putting a fair amount of work together, and I'm satisfied that they're going to be open to working with us on that. So since that's all I have for announcements.
Any other board announcements?
I got my 7-point bomb
Oh,
last week when I was gone.
First day.
I got it early enough so I could come back from this meeting.
You and Shumlin. I think his was sick. That's
Uh,
right.
Let's see, that on the, did we want to do the?
Yes, if you could
Self-evaluation.
give us the summary.
I have one disagree on the agenda items were prioritized and moved from the parking lot. That was Diane. I actually usually disagree on that, except we tried hard to move stuff. Just didn't succeed. And on the superintendent,
Tell who it is.
sure you can. Sure you can.
It's a public meeting.
It's a public meeting, yeah. No opinion on the presentation data and expert opinions reflected varying perspectives of an issue which the board was asked to discuss. Other than that, we did fine.
I will-
Maybe not as fine if it was the Common Core standards, but we're still working under the old standards.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.